Uh, Good evening to another discussion of Talking with Poets. This is Indra Namithnagam, your host to the Poetry Channel, and chatting today with my dear friend and who's also been on the show in the past with an earlier book, SUSANA H. Welcome, SUSANA, to the Poetry Channel.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, really excited about this conversation we're about to have about really, I think, an undeniable book of yours, and a book that will be read simply for generations to come. It's really, of course, a famous, important subject, love, and and you tackled it in various ways. If this is love,
it's really about how young girls and young women learn about love, and that was the impetus for creating this particular collection. I grew up with romance comics and soap operas, or as I call them in this collection, telenovela. And the way that love is portrayed in both of those is very, well, I want to say it's different from love in real life, but in creating the collection, I began to think, well, that's not actually so true. There's a lot of overlap in terms of the issues that get involved and the melodrama involved.
Right. So let's begin by the conversation with listening to one of your poems from If This Isn't Love. Go ahead.
Okay, well, this is the title poem, If This Isn't Love. Eating nachos covered with Velveeta cheese in a diner in Wyoming. We're hungry, and all the menu offerings are a little off like that. Earlier, at Barrett Lodge Butte, we watched a snake eat a nestful of baby birds, the fear chirps silenced one by one, mother crying out as she bombarded the predator trying to block it. She had built her nest too low. In an indigenous myth, the rock rose from the ground to protect young girls from giant bears. And I wonder how high off the ground one needs to be if our first floor apartment in New York City can shield us. Before we left for this vacation, a man stormed into our building waving a gun around the hallway, jealous that his woman had found a better man to sleep with in the apartment by the stairs. The reality is there's no true protection from projectiles, nor from the hungry or the maniacs. I want your arms around me anyway. Velveeta unpalatable, like me, a congealing mess in badly air-conditioned air. I don't live in that first floor apartment anymore, right. But it was, a lot of, a lot of my life was mined for these particular poems.
It's an uncompromising vision there, Velveeta unpalatable, a congealing mess and badly air-conditioned heat.
The way I got back to the telenovela is that we were traveling in Italy, and we were on Procida,
go ahead.
Island off the Bay of Naples, and happened to stumble upon in the main piazza a filming with two actors, and of course a lot of crowd gathered around them. And filming in Italy is very different from filming in New York, for example, where the street is blocked off and there's someone in charge of keeping the crowds away. Here you had tourists crossing over right into the scene, eating gelato. You had schoolgirls screaming because the actress was absolutely gorgeous and was wearing a gorgeous dress. So of course, we stopped too to watch them do about, 50 takes of this particular scene. And I asked one of the young girls who was screaming in excitement, who is she? Because she was screaming about the woman. She said, I don't know. So she was all excited. She didn't even know who she was screaming over. But after they finally got the shot they wanted, I asked the cinematographer, what were they filming? And he told me they were filming a show called Un Posto al Sole. So I checked this out when I got home. It's a long-running Italian soap opera. It's been on for, 26 years then, so a few more years now. And because I'm a student of Italian and I thought I could improve my ear, I looked for episodes which are available on RAI and which don't have English subtitles. So it really forced me to listen to the Italian, but then I got involved in the plots. And then I began to think about the way that the plots overlapped real life. And so I started to write poems directly in response to Un Posto al Sole, and saw the way I could interweave those poems with poems having similar themes that came from outside of the
Right.
telenovela.
Let me, I see two lines in this book. One line is the telenovela line, and the other is your autobiography in poems. Autobiography / biography or biography of other friends' experiences with love or falling in love, or as you mentioned earlier, a young girl or young woman's sort of introduction to love. But it, so tell me about these two lines and how they merge. You mentioned earlier that they're the correspondences and that one seems to be informing the other, but I think it's a very interesting strategy. And in all of your books, you have an architecture that's very interesting to analyze and sort of draw out, because they're not by chance. The poems are not placed in where they are by chance.
No.
So my question really is, tell me about the two lines, the autobiography. To what extent is this an autobiography about your experiences in love in this camp?
Well, not only mine, because I certainly took advantage of all of my various friends' melodramatic relationships. Well, for example, one very common theme in telenovelas in general, and in this one, is adultery. So, for example, in telenovela 2, which is a poem about adultery, I follow it with a poem about a friend of mine, Deidre, and her experience with adultery. And I can read you that pairing if you'd like, so you can see the connections. So this is telenovela 2. The secret is out. Ricardo's wife, Virginia, went to bed with his brother because adultery with family members makes good TV. It was only once, she pleads. You were so remote. She still hopes their marriage can be saved. Ricardo is sad, confesses to his new lover, Rosella, he lied about being single. Rosella, in a chic dress, bleeds tears. I knew a man like Ricardo, only realized something was off when he kissed me and then began to mumble about the temptations of Satan. It's not every day I hear about the Bible. He was holding a bag with a suit he'd just bought for his son. That ended that, and fast. Is it over for Ricardo and Rosella? Don't touch me, Rosella turns her back. Sono uno stronzo. I am an asshole, Ricardo confesses. The music is dramatic. They bite each other's lips. Let me tell you, it's rare in life to happen like that. So here is how it pretty much happened in life. Something amiss. Deidre's had an out-of-body experience, by which she means an out-of-her-marriage experience, blames me that her husband found out. My lips were sealed, I protest. His eyes were peeled, she lobs back, all accusatory. We've been on the outs lately after I refused to loan her my dog. She proposed to stand outside Barney's, hoped with a cute dog to meet someone new, preferably a man who could afford the pricey clothes. Her husband on his way to being ex anyway. Deidre pounds my living room wall over whether she'll ever fall in love again. I've got one more love in me, or two. For an answer, I bring her to my ex to have her cards read. He was a shitty husband, but a brilliant tarot interpreter. I can see the hesitation while he lays out the deck, tells her she'll soon wed again. He confesses to me later he lied, pulled the Chariot and the Three of Swords, meaning she'll never be able to truly love anyone. A couple weeks later, I see her outside Barney's with a cockatoo on her shoulder. It's squawking, but Deidre talks, well, mostly shrieks above the noise, to a handsome man in a suave coat who is foolish enough to try to stroke the bird. I keep walking because if he only loses a finger, he'll be a lucky man.
Yeah, it's a marvelous poem. Something
Barney's is a club for people who might not know. Barney's, was a high-end clothing store that used to be near the apartment where I lived, and I had a very cute dog, so of course she wanted to, use it.
But ended up having a cockatoo instead in this. Yeah. The cockatoo is straight from life, or is that an invention?
I added the cockatoo. She wanted the dog. She didn't get
the dog. Okay. So that's where the surreal comes in, and the poet's invention comes in with the cockatoo, which adds a whole nother layer about speech.
Yeah, well, we're not writing biographies and we're not writing autobiographies, so real life is material, but then we enhance the material.
Right, but that's my question is coming to that. I mean, yes, we're not writing biographies, or are we? I mean, or are we telling a truth that's even more compelling than the detail?
Well, things may be true that aren't real. Or that's how I like to think about it anyway.
There's something amiss about that answer, but I'll take it. I'll take it. No, it's a lovely poem, and these two really speak well to each other. This particular telenovela. Now, how many telenovelas are there? About 8 or 10?
There are 13.
13, yeah. And why 13?
That I didn't want it to be a book solely about the telenovela, and it just seemed the right amount to use as a kind of frame or structure to fit other poems in between. So
I was just wondering if there's something to 13 being a quarter of 52 weeks in a year.
But you get a telenovela poem, and then you get a few poems addressing the similar theme, and then you get another telenovela poem. So it shifts a lot, I think, and helps break up the too much time spent.
The reason I ask about autobiography is because it's an obsession of mine. I mean, I writing poems as a kind of diary or autobiographical exploration.
Very, very,
but then reading this book, this is the closest I've come in your work to what I would call a sort of at least a playful playing with elements from your life and the lives of your friends in a very gentle but clear way. Every poem is very intelligible. There's nothing extraneous, and nothing complicated or difficult to unravel, which I love. But I'm just saying it's the closest it's the most personal book of yours that I know.
Probably is the most personal book, except for an old chapbook I wrote, The Cost of Heat, which are completely poems about my second marriage.
Okay.
But other than that, yes, this is probably the most personal. Yes.
And so you're on your. Is this a personal question? You're on your third marriage?
My second
marriage. Okay. Oh, good. I must read that book. Tell me about at this time in your poetic life, your career. You really are a very accomplished poet, and you're very well known now throughout the English-speaking world, at least in the United States. But tell me why this book at this time? I mean, did you have a conscious idea of writing this book now, or are these just poems that just came up, naturally, and then you found a thesis for them?
No, the idea came so only because of stumbling onto that piazza in Procida. And
Okay.
otherwise I would have never thought to write a series of poems centered on the telenovela.
Yeah. No, but I, for me, I could even put the telenovela poems aside, and I'd just be delighted just with the rest of the book. You know what I'm saying is that they're all fine, but the most personal elements are not in the telenovela for me. I mean, my takeaways. I'll go back to. I mean, for example, I don't want to jump to the end, but all the poems you finish with Italian lessons, communing with Einstein, steps. It's just a marvelous way of finishing the book. What I'm trying to say to any reader or listener is that this book reads well from beginning to end, and you might read it the other way around, from end to beginning, and then have even other epiphanies come up, you know?
Thank you. I wanted a happy ending.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I ended with Communing with Einstein in the Steps poem, because
Right, right.
there's a fair amount of distress, abusive situations that don't work out for various reasons, a lot of melodrama in the rest of the book. So I did want that happy ending. I wanted it to, in a way, tell a story, which if you read it from front to back, it does.
Yeah, and steps is just
Grabbing you and saying this is a story, but
yeah.
you can follow the narrative line.
I have many favorite poems in this book, but I must say that you finish strong. I mean, it's not often it comes across a poetry book that finishes stronger even than it begins, you know, and that's how this book has done it for me with steps.
So maybe I should read Steps now.
Yeah, but I don't want to take away the punchline, but it's a lovely poem, and it's an eternal sort of poem. Go ahead. Why don't you read Steps so that we can come back? Yeah, yeah.
I'd forgotten how many steps it takes to descend this treacherous trail that long ago was used by Santorini donkeys. You are so much more sure-footed and already farther ahead. The shifting gravel and kicked up dust make me feel I'm too old for dirt, that I should have stowed the sneakers, stayed back to sip grappa, read magazines by the pool, forgetting the girl who skipped down this slippery slope so many years ago in the first flowering of freedom after she kicked through the thick fishnet of her contentious first marriage, making this a sort of love poem, and not the first one, to you and to the foolish girl who thought she might be alone the rest of her life, but ended up fine, happy even, pausing to steady herself, to squint at the impossible blue.
Really, this is to be written on a stone. And, you know, this line about after she kicked through the thick fishnet of her contentious first marriages, it really, the words slow you down, and you see yourself pushing through that fishnet, you know, and the contentiousness of it, and then moving on to the finish, that impossible blue, to squint at the impossible. So congratulations for Steps, congratulations for this book, but we're not done yet. I'd like to get a sense of the arc of this book, and also a question about the different stories are. I mean, I think of a book called Bob Black's, who wrote a wonderful book when he was a student at Columbia. It was compiled much later on, called Episodes, and these were just little vignettes. And I think of each of these as a little lesson in them, you know, some of these poems, and but they are about adultery, they're about deception, about the disappointments that are all part of this love business. But are there, do you want readers just to look for, well, familiarity? In other words, they'll read a poem and then they'll think about their own lives and sort of see how their lives correspond with the experience of the poem, or is there some sort of
I can't force anybody to see the convergences in their own lives, but I want people to have fun with the book. I mean, I talk, you know, there's a lot of difficult situations portrayed in the book, but the telenovela interruptions, so to speak, that traverse the manuscript are meant to be the kind of light relief to the rest, so that, for example, if there is a poem about violence, I try to connect it to the violence in the telenovela, which we know that isn't real. So it's easier to digest, I guess you could say. Then,
Why don't we take a few minutes and let's hear a selection from throughout the book. I mean, you've read a couple of the poems, as the title and steps, but perhaps you could go back through to the beginning and then maybe read, give a little sense of the flow of some of these stories that you're telling about, these sometimes violent stories that you referred
okay,
to.
so let me start. Maybe I should start with the very beginning, although we've talked about some of this already. The very first poem is Love Stories for Girls.
Right.
Every distortion I learned about love came from romance comics and later telenovelas. I blame the words love at first sight, walking in the rain, walking on beaches, dancing on beaches, red sports cars. I blame messages about the unimportance of a career, unrealistically perfect bodies, and men with full heads of hair. I blame super long eyelashes and the negative portrayal of eyeglasses, the idea of nice girls. I blame kissing. Really, kissing fries the brain, and afterward, everyone ends up in love with an inappropriate person and they're never the same again. I blame makeup, that tears never smear. I blame tears. So that's sort of where it starts. I think this is a good one, because when I read this, people sometimes think this is a funny poem until I get to the end, and there's some humor in it, but it's not really meant to be funny. And it was inspired by an experience in the early years of my teaching career. I taught university students for a very long time. And when I started, I was in my 20s. So I was working at that time in a program where students were returning to school after a break. So they weren't traditional age students, and many of them were older than me, and many of them were my age. So the barrier that sometimes exists between professor and student, it just wasn't there. And so that's part of how this poem got generated. So this is called Brothel. My student Lisa invites me to staff the front desk nights, says I won't have much to do in the Upper East Side apartment where she turns tricks, and I can get a book out of it. I'm already titling it Brothel, envision scribbling through the slow hours, pages piling up, tenure, or better, a bestseller. But I've been trying to work on my marriage to a husband more jealous than Othello, who keeps track of my every hour. She's going on about the wealthy oil man who a group of the girls peed on last night, and I interrupt to regretfully reject the offer, probably a mistake, because Brothel would sell more copies than my poetry books, and my marriage blows up later anyway, like anything with contents under pressure put to the flame. Her pimp, someone who scares me, walks into my office as if he owns her, me, even the university. He ignores everything except for Lisa, says not a word. She rushes her stuff together, follows him out, head bent in submission. And I think about how tough she looked as she laughed about the John sprawled on the floor.
Yeah, I read that poem thinking I would like to ask you about it. Yeah,
So, that there's a thread of implicit violence in that poem and in a number of the poems that appear here. Looking for.
The John sprawled on the floor, suggesting that the John's been knocked out.
No, he's on the floor because he's got a fetish and he.
Oh, I see. Okay, right.
He wants the prostitutes to pee on him. So
right.
Not an uncommon fetish, as I understand it. But
I see. Okay.
anyway, so yeah, this would have been good material for a book if I had done it. It
Right.
probably was a mistake not to do it. Okay, I'm looking for another that addresses this kind of violence.
What about Bone Church? Or not violence, but just the fact that the bones, that we end up as bones. That's
Okay. Church. I'll have to.
Page 10. But I'll let you pick. I mean, don't worry.
I can. Okay, here's Bone Church. In San Bernardino alle Ossa, Milano, as in other ossuaries, the bones of the dead are placed into designs, crosses formed with skulls, flourishes made from tibiae and femurs under the vaulted dark wood. A skull cathedral on pillars, walls, and doors, tightly packed shelves of bone clutter, sheltered by a worn frescoed ceiling. A patterned insufficiency of remembrance. So many deaths, the medieval graveyard full of bones exposed from the earth, patients from the leper hospital, monks, beheaded prisoners, and in an America of crosses, flowers, and stuffed animals, part of a child's destroyed jaw, discreetly covered in an open casket, another American shooting. The small bones of small bodies. In San Bernardino alle Ossa on All Souls Day, they say a little girl comes back to life and dances with fellow skeletons. I had written this, of course, after another of the innumerable school shootings in the United States. And what had struck me about that one in particular was that the child's part of the child's face had been blown away, and to address this, the face was just covered with a handkerchief, and as if that would resolve the violence or even gate the violence in some way. So it was kind of a weird little image for me, and I built the poem around that. I do find ossuaries kind of interesting.
And you've seen ossuaries in San Bernardino alle Ossa and elsewhere.
Yes, that one and elsewhere. I mean, it's interesting in some ways. It's a different attitude toward death than we have certainly here in the United States. It's a much more matter-of-fact handling of bones.
Right, and it makes me want to ask you about traveling, because the traveler in you is throughout this book. You find on a chicken with a chicken on a bus in Guatemala.
Chicken bus, yes.
That's a good poem too. And so tell me about how, because I've often offline asked you about your trips and are you going to meet poets and so on. You say no, I'm going to see the country or get myself into the culture. But
yeah, I don't tend to travel for poetry, but of course you pick up all sorts of stuff in your head, and it ends up in
poems, in these poems. It's really,
yes. There are a number actually set in Guatemala. If I may, I'd like to read actually one of the other Guatemalan ones.
Sure, please.
Night Guatemala City, because we've been talking about violence.
Which poem is it again?
Night, Guatemala City.
Okay.
Prostitutes line streets of the rich, ambulantes outside fancy houses, walls around properties topped with broken glass. It's where to find men with money, not like La Linea, sex sold in shacks by old railroad tracks, where even driving by to look is dangerous. Babies, too, are sold, children selling children, beholden to gangs. What can philosophy say about adversity like this? Schopenhauer thought suffering inevitable, the nature of life, life not worth living, that we should shelter ourselves with art. We could be like my dogs, heads hidden by blankets, believing themselves protected. Oh, painting, how can art blanket anyone? Prostitutes line canvases of impressionism, dancing, drinking, resting. See Olympia reclining, her face sallow, expressionless. The marketplace is busy. Everywhere, working women die destitute. Mm-hmm. So the way this poem came about is many, many years ago. I was going to Guatemala, and the man I was dating at the time was also in higher ed and had a student who was from Guatemala, and asked if I would go visit on his behalf his parents, who were there, just so they could sort of make contact with someone who knew his son. I didn't know his son, but knew someone who was working with his son. And so I said, sure. And I was traveling with a girlfriend of mine. And so when we were there, we went to visit. Right before we went to visit, I was pickpocketed, and instead of stealing my wallet, the pickpocketers stole my glasses. So all I had with me were sunglasses, which I also then had to wear at night because I can't get around without my glasses. So walking around at night, I appeared to be a prostitute because of the sunglasses and being young. So when we went to the neighborhood where his parents lived, and it appeared to be wealthy. The house was very beautiful and big and surrounded by one of those fences that are topped with glass. But right outside, all around that street, it was an area of prostitution. And initially, I think some of the workers felt that I was encroaching on their territory, because I too appeared to be a prostitute at that point. So, there was a lot of trying to unravel the misunderstandings that no, I was here, I was just going to visit the family. I was not working the street. But in the process of that interaction, I of course became interested in their lives. So that generated the poem, or the memory of it generated the poem, because this happened some decades back, and I only wrote the poem within the past decade.
Right. Have you, in any previous work, taken on this your travels so plentifully?
They always end up. Always end up in my poems. Yeah. There's more Italy in this book than there are other places, but Italy in particular, it does end up in a lot of my poems. But so do a lot of the other places I've been in. Right. A lot of places, and yes, they end up in poems.
So I'll ask you a very cliche, perhaps, question, but from all of your travels, do you end up coming back and finding that you could have just stayed at home, you could have traveled at home? Or what have you learned? Okay, Never. Go ahead, tell me. The leading question to get you to.
No, and I never watch travel shows because it's just not the same. You have to physically be there. And no, I would not have written the same way without any of it. I'll read you another travel poem, if I may. One of the Italian ones. This is from my terrazza. I see Bellagio. And I think you were part of that group that
Yes.
generated this. We were in some Zoom reading, and Anjay said, yes, from my terrace, I can see Bellagio, when she was describing where she lived. And I don't remember who got the idea that we should all go and write a poem that ended with Bellagio.
And it led to a book, right?
And it led to a reading at the Poetry Museum. I think, was it at the Poetry Museum or somewhere in Italy on Zoom? And yes, and they were collected in a journal, if I recall.
Was it a journal or a chapbook? Okay, a journal. Yeah.
I think
I think we received the PDFs of it. Yeah.
Yes, because there were a whole bunch of us. Anyway, this was mine, and from my terrazza, I see Bellagio. So young was I, ragazza, when last in Bellagio. A lovely Italian man and I strolled the Borgo in Bellagio, stopping at little shops in Bellagio. I photographed iron balconies, flowers of Bellagio, wondering who lived in the hills so close to Bellagio. Imagined myself and the man in a palazzo near Bellagio. We were like two branches of Lake Como in Bellagio. The mine was a temporary stay in Bellagio. In truth, my terrazzo looks out on a chronic care hospital far, far from Bellagio. Looks out on the borough of Queens, where I grew up, where Bellagio is a hair salon and spa, not the one in the Grand Hotel Via Cerbiglione in Bellagio, and the man in quality Italian shoes on the cobblestones of Bellagio. Who knows if his home is still in Bellagio, if he has aged just right like Bellagio. But sometimes in a New York summer, it's Bellagio I see from my terrazza, the Torre delle Arti Bellagio, and both of us still young, in love, in the sun of Bellagio, debating art, our legs entwined on one of the green lawns of Bellagio. I rarely write in form, but there are a few form poems in this collection, and this is one of them, in which every line, of course, ends in Bellagio. Yeah.
But the form, what is the specific form that you're writing in here? I'm just.
Oh God, it's the opposite of anaphora, and I've now for a moment
Oh, that's all right.
But it's the one that's the opposite of anaphora, which starts with the same word or phrase. And one of the things I forgot to mention about when we did all those poems about from my terrazza, I see Bellagio, is they were translated. So the volume that came out was a dual language volume, English and Italian, which was kind of nice.
And you translated some of the poems too.
Some of them, yes, and other people translated others, and some of the poets were from Italy, and some of the poets were from English-speaking countries, possibly all from the United States, but I don't remember. And so, yes, it was a nice international effort.
Yeah, I must look for that. Look up that book again. It's funny how the pandemic seems so far away, and like in some distant galaxy or something.
Well, it's actually, it's funny, because I'm reading a novel which is set during it, but there's actually a reference to the pandemic there's a couple of references, I think, to the pandemic here. This is one of them.
You have the one about yes, there's a poem where you talk about the singing, right, in the empty square, that famous
yes
opera.
The telenovela poems, and there's this one which very, very gently alludes to it. Maybe I'll read them both if we have time.
Yeah, no, we do. I think we could. We're winding down, so go ahead and read those two, and then we can come up with some.
So this is Extraordinary Streets, and here it's just mentioned very subtly, and maybe you'd even miss it if you didn't know we'd lived through it. And it's Extraordinary Streets. Winters remind me of an old black and white film, people on the sidewalks of Moscow, breaths scoring the air. They carried big blocks of frozen milk. My first thought, not of the cold, but shock that anyone could drink that much milk. Good thing my grandparents fled. That kind of life not suited to me, vodka in vending machines, of which I think there could never be enough, years of daily lines for bread. I prefer to peel off a lighter coat, maybe a hip leather moto jacket or no coat, to write about anything other than death. I've been working on that for years, which is why I'll end now with a ruffled blue silk dress I put on today to float down East End Avenue after lockdown, practicing walking again in heels.
Yeah, after lockdown. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much the reference to it. And you know, someone might say, well, what is lockdown? You know, someone reading this, I don't know, 100 years from now, if such a thing is ever going to happen,
That's right.
if the planet isn't dead by then, I might say, well, lockdown, what's that? That might require a footnote.
Right. And also in another poem, you talk of the speaker
Yes.
complains about those who have left the city for Vermont
Yes.
and other places,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes.
more, yes. sit out the lockdown and
Right.
not in their apartments. Yeah, very good.
This is the poem that talks the most, I think, about the pandemic, and that's the first telenovela poem.
Go ahead.
I think I will read that. So this is telenovela 1. I don't spit on the plate where I eat. The son without steady work explains to his worried father in a long-running soap opera, an Italian proverb that sends me to the internet. They drink wine on their patio off the Golfo di Napoli. Yesterday, I was on another patio, a restaurant off Arthur Avenue. A woman with a Bronx accent was so loud, we decided to move inside, where Andrea Bocelli was singing Cante Partiro on the mixtape. In Puglia, I heard the song during a church service, loved it so much, I emailed the priest to ask the song's name, carefully checking that my Italian was correct. He never responded. Silly American, to email a priest about a pop song of loss and goodbyes. Leaving our patio seats started a movement. The tables emptied out. Everyone then enjoyed their wine in the air conditioning, listening to Andrea Bocelli, except for the loudmouth still on the patio and her friends. When Andrea Bocelli sang in front of the Duomo in Milano during the lockdown, that video with all the silenced cities of the world, music for hope, made everyone cry as if soap were burning their eyes. We watched the death count going up. Watch the Italian family at the center of the telenovela who live in Posillipo overlooking Vesuvius. The purses are big and voluptuous. Everyone is serious. The only one smiling is the girlfriend of the married doctor who wants to rid himself of a stalker wife. The girlfriend likes his new apartment. Her walk is springy. Oh, she's in love. She hasn't a clue.
Right.
The one about leaving for the Hampton, leaving the city is
right.
ornithology, very much a New York poem.
That's right.
One of the curious
courageous things, New Yorkers leaving the city for Vermont.
well, one of the interesting things that happened during the pandemic is my apartment is right next to the East River, and we always used to have seagulls. I don't know why seagulls when it's a river, but we always, I mean, you know, New York is near the ocean, so there were seagulls. Right. And then once all the restaurants shut down, I don't know, the seagulls, they disappeared, and there was an influx of pigeons. And that spurred the writing, of which I still haven't been able to resolve. They're always getting onto my, the air conditioning, top of the air conditioner, everything. They're all over, but it inspired New York ornithology. So maybe I'll end up with reading New York ornithology.
And before you do, I just want to also make a mention for the cover. This
Yes,
beautiful
thank
cover
you. Yes.
made by Mervyn
Yes,
Taylor. Right?
Mervyn Taylor, a good friend and a fabulous cover. And one of the things I love about the cover, aside from the style of the art, which I'm very partial to, is that it addresses so many themes from the book. The red car that was in the Love Stories for Girls poems, of course, the TV for the telenovela, the blue dress, which is I talk about in a poem, and then that road which sort of goes out to who knows where, but maybe the rest of the world, which is brought in as well. So
and it is a somewhat of a yellow brick road, isn't it? A yellow road, anyway.
Well, maybe a metaphorical one.
Yeah, very good. Thank you,
so,
Mervyn, and
yes, thank you, Mervyn Taylor. It is a beautiful, beautiful cover, and because he's one of the people that we always exchange poems. He knew, what to expect from this manuscript, and so when I sent that, it was perfect. So,
and thank you also to Broadstone, Larry.
Yes.
Who has published you again, and in a handsome edition.
Who has published all of us, Mervyn, you and me. Yes, wonderful press. Yes, so thank you, Larry Moore.
So we'll close, not close, because this book there are many poems more that we haven't touched on, but hopefully you will look for the book at broadstonebooks.com or elsewhere. In many different places online. And if this isn't love, SUSANA H case. Thank you, SUSANA.
Thank you. And this is New York ornithology. The pigeons are shitting everywhere. Dullards belligerent on the terrace railings, splattering the planters. I want to shoo them to the unoccupied apartments where people who tried to escape the virus decamped for Vermont, or worse, the Hamptons, people I'm angry at because they didn't support my beloved city by ordering internet toilet paper and food while holed up in locked digs. It's impossible to reason with the small brain. I bang on all the windows, but the birds ignore me. I run outside screaming, waving my arms, and they saunter to the other side of the terrace as if they themselves decided to change position. I try silver strands of ribbon, party decorations that catch the sun, the glint meant to chase pigeons away. The birds are indifferent. Stoning them would work, but that would be cruel. Once there were seagulls by the river. Who knows what happened to them? Maybe climate change. Yesterday, a hawk perched outside an apartment across the street, red-tailed and magnificent. Hawks can't possibly poop as much as pigeons do. With luck, the hawk is hungry. With luck, he'll bring his whole family to feast. So I had read that one of the things that, because I had noticed, wow, I'm starting to see red-tailed hawks in the city, which is unusual, but they were around. And so I looked up what they ate, and one of the things they like very much is pigeon. So that is why they were hanging around the buildings here as well.
But I couldn't help but think of the birds, of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
Well, sometimes, yes.
I'm not sure you want to wish for a whole family of red-tailed hawks to show up outside your window.
Well, better the red hawks than the pigeons. They're much more beautiful.
Right. And what happens if the hawk starts beaking in through your window? Anyway, wonderful book. If this isn't love, and SUSANA H case, I think her most personal and most endearing book to date. I hope you look for it. Thank you very much, Susanna. Wonderful
Thank
chatting
you,
with you. All the best to you from the Poetry Channel.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I'll stop the recording.